to kick it off by sharing a bit about why this topic is so important to the team at Arnerich Massena. So Bryan, I'm going to hand it on over to you.
Great. Thank you, Reegan. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really embedded in the DNA at Arnerich Massena. And I'm just going to read kind of the key takeaways from our diversity and inclusion manifesto. It really leads in with humanity is plural, not singular. Arnerich Massena strives to foster a culture that inspires and nurtures the human spirit in all its diverse manifestations, understanding that diversity drives innovation, growth, and new ideas. We recognize and honor the fact that diversity is integral to the firm's values and successes. And while our efforts around DEI historically haven't been quite as explicit as they are today, I think that ethos of incorporating different perspectives, different backgrounds has always been part of the philosophy and really ultimately the culture at Arnerich Massena. And speaking for Reegan, I know she and I are so honored to be part of the team that gets to carry and steward that philosophy into the future with this great team that we have working for us. The intentional effort really began with the creation of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team back in 2017. You can see that kind of noted in the we are active in reflecting DEI values internally. But we've also wanted to push the envelope further. We went through the process of becoming a certified B Corporation in 2020, which really drives us to be a leader around how we think about ESG issues, which certainly really plays into the DEI conversation. And the summer of 2020 obviously also sparked a much needed conversation around equality and just recognizing that that conversation was lacking. We actually marked Juneteenth as a company holiday ahead of when it became a national holiday, but really wanting to use that time to not only provide education and resources to our team at Arnerich Massena, but just opening conversations that historically we just didn't have. And then also using that time as an opportunity to just reflect on where the world is, where our different perspectives are, and what we need to do individually and collectively as a team to really evolve. Secondarily, I think it's really important that we think about DE&I through every lens that we possibly can. How do we think about it with our internal teams? How do we think it from a leadership standpoint? Clearly, how do we think about it from a hiring perspective? It's so easy to build and surround yourself with a team of like-minded people, but the best decisions are really made when you're actively seeking input from other people who have different experiences, different perspectives, come from different backgrounds, and ideally avoiding that unconscious bias that can really just play its way unintentionally into your thought process. Another frame that we can not only look through, but hopefully it helps drive further awareness outside of Arnerich Massena is really through our manager research process. And this has frankly been a pretty key area of focus for our research team over the past year and a half. Ben's going to go through a lot of what we've learned and where we're at on that journey and how it relates to our process at Arnerich Massena. But I think one of the most important things is we first needed to understand where we were starting from internally. And then secondarily, how can we amplify our voice within the investment management industry and really get investment managers and any other stakeholders that we're working with to think about these issues more comprehensively? And so today it's really about intentionality and progress and having that kind of baseline, that starting point for where we're at and then the context of where the industry is an important starting point. But I'm really proud of where we are today. Ben has some great results to share, but really this is going to be an ever evolving journey and we are just really at the start of it, but excited to see where this takes us over the coming years and decades. Reegan, I'll pass it back to you to highlight what DE&I looks like at Arnerich Massena.
Thank you. Arnerich Massena has truly been a trailblazer in this industry since our founding in 1991. We were founded by Lisa Massena and Tony Arnerich in an era where female founders and executives were really non-existent at the time. This November, we are excited to celebrate our 30th anniversary as a firm and proud to report that building diverse teams is still very much part of our DNA. And the research shows that this truly does make an impact. Companies with greater workforce diversity often have better profitability, are more likely to outperform, and are 2 times more likely to be innovation leaders in their market. So for all of our clients and investors who are joining us today, we hope you share in the deep pride that we have for building diverse teams. It really is meaningful to us, and hope you understand it truly benefits you as clients as it flows through our firm profitability, staff performance, and ultimately your portfolios and their underlying performance. Finally, we're excited to share with you all that we were recognized by Investment News this past summer with an award for excellence in our firm practices in DEI. So again, this is in our DNA as a company and also incorporated into how we are screening the managers that we're implementing in our client portfolios. So next, I would like to hand it over to Ben Larsen, who will share exactly how we are doing this.
Great. Thanks, Reegan. And I first just want to start out by saying, we've learned a lot over the last year, and yet we've just scratched the surface. This is a space where I will always and we will always have our student hat on, because in every DE&I conversation, I learned something new. We learned something new. And so kind of our motto is really to learn from those that are leaders in the space, to grow internally, and then to teach others. So with that said, just starting out with different ways you can look at DE&I, we can have self-reflection. So which Bryan and Reegan both alluded to, of looking at our DE&I practices. In the middle, you have asset management firms, where I'll be spending my time today focusing on DE&I practices of investment managers. And then on the right-hand side of those underlying companies and asset management funds, and what do those DE&I practices and policies look like? So why does DE&I matter to us? We believe at Arnerich Massena that different opinions at the table lead to better decision-making and better problem solving. And second, as we looked at the research, it shows uncategorically that diverse management contributes to success and profitability in businesses. And that makes sense, right? Because you're getting the most out of your employees when they feel included, and when there's a true diverse thought. And so if we go to the next slide, from an investment return perspective, the Wall Street Journal did a study on the S&P 500 and looked at the 500 companies in that index. So the top 20 diverse and inclusive companies actually outperformed over a 5-year and a 10-year period relative to the middle DNI and bottom 20 DNI companies. So it's actually showing from a bottom line, from an investment return perspective. And this is just one source. There's many others that show very similar characteristics and conclusions. So if we scroll to the next slide, I want to take a step back. And if we were to evaluate the financial services industry, and if it were to be a pure reflection of the US demographics, what would that look like? And so this is taken from the 2020 census in the United States. And on the left-hand side, distribution by sex, you can see that 50.8% of our population is women. And on the right-hand side, distribution by race, 38.4% of our US population are minorities. And so if we were to have a pure reflection of the demographics in the United States, speaking from a financial services perspective, these are the numbers in which we would expect. But we do know that, and as we all know, the financial industry and services industry lags woefully compared to other industries. So let's take a look at what the financial services industry breakdown looks like. On the left-hand side, you can see with this chart, or this pie graph, only 5.5% of all mutual funds are women-owned, and that's using a 25% plus ownership threshold. And only 3.9% of all mutual funds are minority-owned. And so you can see that is not a pure reflection of the US demographics. And on the right-hand side, looking specifically at portfolio managers, or PMs, you can see that those highlighted 3 bars, 80% of portfolio managers in the United States are white, and 20% are minorities. So again, not a pure reflection of the US demographics. And so now that we have an understanding of why the financial services industry, or what it looks like, let's scroll to the next slide, and we can look at what we're doing. So we really set out to understand where our managers, where they stood relative to the industry. And so we asked all of our approved managers to fill out a DDQ, or a due diligence questionnaire, focused on DE&I. And we also ask our prospective approved equity managers to do the same. And so on the top, you can see that these equity and these questions, this is just a subset of questions. We ask over 100 questions in the due diligence questionnaire. But we set out to understand what were the equity and inclusive policies and practices of our managers, and then what did the demographics look like? So is your firm a UNPRI signatory? Does your firm define goals for creating more diverse and inclusive teams at the senior level? Does the firm have a family leave or parental policy? And so these were some of the questions that we were asking, and you can see the breakdown there. And then on the bottom, focusing on the diversity of DE&I, you can see some of the results that coming from our approved equity managers. And just a side note, the gold or the NA, those are publicly traded firms. And so we can't actually obtain that information. And we focus more on board of governors questions for those specific companies. But highlighted in those white triangles, you can see on the left-hand side, 27% of our investment managers on the public equity side have some level of women as PMs. The second pie chart, 46% of our investment managers have some level of racial or ethnic minorities as PMs. And then the third chart, 64% of our managers have some level of equity ownership owned by women. And then the last chart, 46% of our investment firms have some level of ownership being held by racial or ethnic minorities. So we can scroll to the next slide. We remember this chart on the left, the industry average being 5.5% of all mutual funds being owned by women, and 3.9% for minorities, using that 25% threshold. So comparing apples to apples, what do Arnerich Massena approved equity strategies, what do they exhibit? And so we can see on the right-hand side, 27% of our equity strategies are women-owned, and 6% of all Arnerich Massena approved equity strategies are minority owned. And so what is that in terms of numbers? So for women owned, that's 5 times greater. And for minority owned, that's 1.5 times greater. And what's interesting is that we didn't set out to find diverse managers. This is just a pure byproduct of our investment process. So I thought that was very interesting with these results, but that doesn't stop there. So next is really, we said, okay, now that we have an understanding of where our managers are at, let's integrate it into our process. And so here's our proprietary 7 Ps research and analytics process. And I won't go through each one of them, but I will point out, you don't notice a DE&I statistic or point on this chart. And that's because it's integrated throughout our conversations with managers. So on the very left-hand side, personnel, we evaluate culture of our managers. So how diverse are our manager personnel, but how inclusive and what do the equity practices look like for those managers? And in passion, our analysts and portfolio managers, their full selves and comfortable to share enough with their teammates, and are they being their full selves? And then for the investment philosophy process and portfolio construction, if they're trying to identify DE&I companies that exhibit strong DE&I characteristics, what do those look like? And what are their processes to identify those companies? So it's really a process throughout in which we integrate DE&I. And so the next step is really the hard yet rewarding step of the process. And so now that we've integrated it throughout our process, it's really engaging with our managers. And so we recognize that this is not going to change overnight. The industry is not going to change overnight. So we think it's a 3 to 5 year engagement process. And we also recognize that now that we know where our managers are at, we're not most likely not going to terminate a manager right now. It's really a process to step in engagement and to learn from others, but also to engage our managers over a 3 to 5 year time horizon, because we think progress can be made over that time. And so in 3 to 5 years, if we don't see progress from our managers, then that conversation comes into play of, we're not going to partner with you guys because we don't see progress here. So how can we engage with managers? And this is an evolving process. Again, having that student hat on. On the left-hand side, are there policies that are conducive to DE&I? What do the policies look like from a maternity and paternity? Is that inclusive and inviting for women in the industry? So policies might change overnight, but the ripple down effect does not change overnight. That culture takes time to build. And then on the right-hand side, actually a big challenge for many investment firms, and this is broader than the investment industry, but financial services, is when they evaluate a candidate pool and they hire, they're wanting to hire the best candidate. And that makes sense. Everybody wants the best candidate. But if you're looking at your candidate pool and you recognize that it's not diverse, you need to take a step back and say, why isn't that diverse? And that's a financial services industry problem. But then how can you encourage and take strides forward and be a part of that change? And many times that looks like partnering with local colleges and high schools early in young adult and child's lives to educate them, because many children and young adults have dreams and aspirations to be professional athletes, but it's a rarity that that's actually a portfolio manager or a consultant. So educating earlier is really some ways that we encourage our managers to partake in. And so you can see on the bottom, Rock the Street, Wall Street, and Girls Who Invest are two great organizations. They're not exhaustive. There's many more, but we have some firms partnering with these organizations. And at the end, really what we're looking for is people who are willing to learn and to grow. And that's what we're asking of our managers. And that's what we're asking for ourselves is, can we learn, can we grow? And then let's put us all on a track to success. So that's a few things that we've been doing recently. We're super excited about it. We're still learning, but I'll pass it back to Reegan.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I really enjoyed that presentation. I learned something too. I didn't know those statistics about our managers and how we stack up to the industry in general. So I really appreciate the fact that you went through that process of pulling that data together. So again, back to that culture of pride, that just makes me so happy that, we really are walking the walk.